Ryan shifted uncomfortably in his seat as the subway car rattled along the tracks, exhaustion pressing down on him after another grueling shift. His head ached, his body was sore, and all he wanted was to get home and collapse onto his couch. But then he saw her. She stood near the subway doors, gripping the metal pole with one hand, her other clutching a heavy-looking tote bag against her side. Her dark hair was pulled up into a messy bun, wisps of it framing her tired face. She looked drained, like she had been on her feet all day, and something about the way she exhaled, shoulders sagging, made Ryan move before he even thought about it. "Here," he said, standing up and motioning to his seat. "You can take this." The woman blinked, clearly surprised, and hesitated. "Oh no, it's okay, you were sitting." Ryan shook his head. "I insist." She studied him for a moment, then finally relented, sinking into the seat with a relieved sigh. "Thank you." "Long day?" Ryan asked, leaning against the subway pole now that he had given up his seat. The woman let out a soft laugh, rubbing her temple. "You could say that." "I work as a nurse, so I've been on my feet for 12 hours straight." Ryan raised an eyebrow. 12 hours, that's brutal," she nodded. "Yeah, but it comes with the job. I love what I do." "Most days." She glanced up at him, offering a small smile. "I'm Claire, by the way." "Ryan," he smiled back. The train jerked suddenly, and Claire instinctively reached out, gripping his arm to steady herself. The touch was brief, but it sent a strange warmth through Ryan's chest. He cleared his throat, trying to ignore the feeling. "So, Ryan," Claire said, still looking up at him, "are you always this chivalrous, or am I just lucky today?" He smirked. "Only for tired nurses who look like they really need a break." Claire laughed, a real one this time, and something about the sound made Ryan's exhaustion feel a little lighter. The train slowed as it approached the next stop, and Claire sighed. "This is me." Ryan nodded, feeling an odd sense of disappointment. It was strange he barely knew her, but he wasn't ready for the conversation to end. Claire stood, adjusting the strap of her bag. "Thanks again for the seat, Ryan." "You're a lifesaver." "Anytime," he said, and he meant it. The doors slid open and Claire stepped out onto the platform. Ryan watched her go, expecting her to disappear into the crowd. But just before she turned the corner, she glanced back, meeting his eyes one last time, and then she was gone. Ryan exhaled, shaking his head at himself. It was just a simple interaction, nothing more. He'd probably never see her again. But fate had other plans. Ryan didn't expect to see her again. New York was too big, too chaotic. People passed in and out of each other's lives like fleeting shadows, barely leaving a trace. That was how it worked. And yet, a week after their subway encounter, he saw her again. It was late, the kind of late where the city had settled into a quieter hum. Ryan had just finished his shift at the construction site, his muscles aching as he stepped into the dimly lit diner near his apartment. The bell over the door jingled as he entered, the scent of coffee and fried food wrapping around him like a familiar embrace. And there she was. Claire sat at the counter, her hair slightly disheveled, a cup of coffee in front of her. She was staring at the steam rising from it, lost in thought. Ryan hesitated for only a moment before walking over. "I think we have a habit of running into each other." Claire's head snapped up, her eyes widening before a slow smile spread across her lips. "Ryan," she tilted her head, amusement flickering across her face. "You again." He settled onto the stool beside her, motioning to the waitress for a coffee. "Long day," Claire exhaled, rubbing her temples. "You have no idea. A patient coded on me today, and even though we got him back, it shook me." Ryan wasn't sure what to say to that. He didn't know the first thing about the medical field, but he understood exhaustion, the kind that settled deep in your bones. "Sounds rough." She nodded, taking a slow sip of her coffee. "What about you?" "Nothing life or death, but I did spend 12 hours hauling cement and reinforcing beams." Claire winced. "That sounds miserable," he smirked. "Pays the bills." They sat in silence for a moment, the kind that felt oddly comfortable. The waitress set Ryan's coffee in front of him, and he took a sip, watching Claire out of the corner of his eye. She was beautiful, but not in an untouchable way. There was something real about her, something grounded. "So," she said, turning slightly to face him, "do you always end up at diners at midnight, or is this just another coincidence?" Ryan chuckled. "I could ask you the same thing." She shrugged, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. "Sometimes after a long shift, I just need a quiet place to sit and breathe." "I get that." He tapped his fingers against his mug. "This place is my go-to after late shifts." "Best coffee in the neighborhood." Claire raised an eyebrow. "That's a bold claim." "Try it, you'll see." She took a careful sip, considering, then she smiled. "Okay, you win." "It's good." Ryan grinned, feeling an odd sense of victory. They talked for a while after that, about little things, music, the worst customers she'd dealt with, the weirdest things he'd seen at his construction site. And then, just like before, time slipped away too fast. Claire glanced at the clock on the wall inside. "I should go." "I have another shift in the morning." Ryan nodded, but he felt that same reluctance from the subway, that same quiet disappointment. She slid a few bills onto the counter and stood, adjusting the strap of her bag. Then, hesitating for a second, she looked at him. "Ryan." "Yeah," she bit her lip, seeming to debate something. Then she reached into her pocket, pulled out a napkin and scribbled something on it. Sliding it across the counter, she met his gaze. "In case we don't leave it up to chance next time." Ryan glanced down at the napkin, her number. When he looked up again, she was already at the door. But just before stepping out, she turned, her eyes lingering on his for a beat longer than necessary. And then she was gone. Ryan sat there for a few moments, staring at the napkin in his hands. Maybe some things weren't just coincidences. Ryan hesitated for 3 whole days before texting Claire. Not because he didn't want to, he did, more than he should. But something about her felt different, like she wasn't just another fleeting conversation on a subway or a casual diner encounter. She was real, and real things had weight. Still, after the 3rd night of pulling the napkin from his wallet, tracing the numbers with his thumb, and telling himself he was being ridiculous, he finally caved. "Ryan, I'd like to say I waited this long to text because I'm playing it cool, but honestly, I just didn't want to seem overeager." He stared at the screen, second-guessing himself until the 3 little dots appeared. "Claire, oh good. I was starting to think you were one of those guys who collects numbers and never actually uses them." Ryan grinned at his phone. "Ryan, I'm not that guy, but I do believe in dramatic timing." Claire, so you're a man of mystery." Ryan, something like that. "So tell me, do you always give your number to strangers in diners, or am I just lucky?" Claire, only to guys who give up their subway seats without hesitation. He liked this. The easy flow of conversation, the way she matched his teasing without effort. It wasn't just attraction, though that was definitely there. It was something else, something he couldn't quite name yet. "Ryan, glad to know I made the cut. What's your schedule like this week?" Claire, chaotic, but I have Saturday off. Ryan, perfect. Let me take you somewhere. Claire, bold of you to assume I'm free. Ryan, you just said you were. Claire, touché. All right, mystery man. Surprise me. Ryan didn't even have a plan yet, but he already knew one thing: he wasn't going to mess this up. Saturday arrived faster than Ryan expected, and somehow he found himself nervous. He wasn't the kind of guy who planned elaborate dates. His past relationships had been casual, easy, nothing that required much thought. But with Claire, he wanted to get it right. So, instead of the usual dinner or drinks, he took her to the waterfront just as the sun was setting. The sky was painted in streaks of orange and pink, the city skyline silhouetted against the colors. A quiet breeze drifted in from the river, bringing with it the scent of the water and something unspoken between them. Claire stood beside him, arms crossed, watching the waves lap at the docks. "I have to admit, I was expecting something more traditional. Dinner maybe," Ryan smirked. "Where's the fun in that? Besides, I figured you spend enough time in crowded rooms. Thought you might like some open air." She turned to look at him, and there was something soft in her expression, something that made his chest tighten. "You figured right." They walked along the pier, talking about everything and nothing. He learned she had always wanted to be a nurse, that she used to bandage up her little brother's scraped knees when they were kids. She learned he had been working construction since he was 19, that he liked the way it forced him to build something real with his hands. It was easy, too easy, and that scared him. "So," Claire said, nudging him with her shoulder, "do you always take women to the docks at sunset, or am I just lucky?" Ryan chuckled. "You're the first." She raised a skeptical brow. "Really? Really?" He met her eyes, serious now. "I don't do this a lot, Claire, the whole dating thing." Something flickered across her face, something knowing. "Neither do I." Ryan swallowed. "Why not?" She hesitated, her gaze drifting to the water. "I guess. When you spend so much time taking care of other people, it's easy to forget to let someone take care of you." His throat tightened. He didn't know what to say to that, so instead, he did something he hadn't planned. He reached for her hand. Claire stiffened for a brief second, then relaxed. Her fingers sliding between his like it was the most natural thing in the world. They stood there for a long time, the city buzzing softly behind them, the river stretching endlessly ahead. And for the first time in a long time, Ryan felt like he wasn't just moving through life, he was standing still, exactly where he was supposed to be, and all because of a single subway seat. Ryan hadn't expected it to feel this easy. Dating, relationships, those things had always seemed complicated in the past, but with Claire, it wasn't like that. There were no games, no overanalyzing every little detail. It was just them talking, laughing, sharing pieces of themselves without hesitation. And yet, the more time they spent together, the more Ryan felt something creeping in, something unspoken. The night at the pier replayed in his mind over and over, the way her fingers had fit so perfectly between his, the way she had looked at him like she was trying to figure out if she could trust him with something fragile. He wanted to tell her that she could, but Claire was careful. She let him in, but only so far. And Ryan, he wasn't used to wanting more. Now, sitting across from her in a quiet cafe on a rare morning they both had off, he studied her as she stirred cream into her coffee, her focus distant, her mind somewhere else. "Claire," he said, voice steady. She glanced up, blinking. You okay?" She hesitated, then sighed. "Yeah, just tired." Ryan didn't buy it. He'd learned to read her well enough by now to know when she was holding something back. "Talk to me," he said, leaning forward slightly. "What's on your mind?" She looked at him for a long moment, then set her spoon down with a soft clink. "I've been thinking about us." His stomach tightened. "Yeah," Claire exhaled, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "Ryan, I like you a lot, and that scares me." His grip tightened around his own coffee mug, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Why?" "Because I don't know how to do this," she admitted, her voice quieter now. "I've spent so much of my life taking care of other people that I don't know how to let someone take care of me. I don't know how to let myself need someone." Ryan's chest ached at the raw honesty in her words. He had never wanted to push her, never wanted to rush anything, but hearing her say it out loud made something inside him settle. "I don't need you to need me, Claire," he said, his voice steady. "I just want you to let me be here." She swallowed, her eyes searching his, as if trying to find something in them that would make this less terrifying. Ryan reached across the table, his fingers brushing against hers. "I don't want to be another thing in your life that drains you. I want to be the thing that gives you room to breathe." Claire let out a soft, almost shaky laugh. "You say that like you've done this before." "I haven't," he admitted. "But I know what it feels like to be alone, even when you're surrounded by people. And I don't want that for you." Claire's eyes softened, and for the first time since the conversation started, she smiled. Not the polite kind, not the guarded one she sometimes gave when she was unsure. It was real, open, unguarded. "Ryan," she murmured, shaking her head slightly. "Yeah," she exhaled, then finally turned her hand over, lacing her fingers with his. "I think I'm falling for you." The words knocked the breath from his lungs. Ryan had never been the kind of guy who needed grand declarations. He was simple, steady. But hearing her say it, seeing the vulnerability in her eyes, it was everything. His grip on her hand tightened just slightly as he let out a breathless laugh. "Good," he said. "Because I'm already there." Claire let out a quiet, disbelieving laugh, shaking her head as if she couldn't believe this was happening. But then she squeezed his hand and something in the air between them shifted. No more hesitations, no more barriers, just them, and for Ryan that was enough. Ryan hadn't planned on falling so hard so fast, but now that it had happened, there was no going back. He and Claire had settled into something that felt effortless and real. They spent stolen moments together between her long shifts and his grueling hours at the construction site. Late-night phone calls turned into early morning coffee runs. The hours they had together were never enough, but they made them count. And yet, despite how deeply they had fallen into each other's orbit, Ryan could feel something lingering in the spaces between them. Claire was still holding back. She let him in, but only so much. She would rest her head on his shoulder after a long shift, but she never let him see her cry. She would whisper her fears about work, about burnout, about the weight of responsibility, but she never let herself lean on him fully. Ryan wasn't going to push. He had told her from the beginning that he wasn't here to take anything from her. He just wanted to be here, beside her, as much as she would let him. But love wasn't meant to be held at arm's length. And sooner or later, something had to give. The storm hit on a Sunday evening, the kind of summer downpour that turned the streets into rivers and sent people running for cover. Ryan had just locked up at the construction site when his phone buzzed. "Claire, are you home?" Ryan frowned, shaking the rain from his hair as he stepped under an awning. "Ryan, not yet. Why?" "Claire, can I come over?" Something about the message made his chest tighten. Claire never just showed up unannounced. She always made plans, always made sure their schedules aligned. This was different. "Ryan, of course, I'll be there in 10. He jogged the rest of the way home, the rain soaking through his shirt, but he barely noticed. By the time he reached his apartment, Claire was already there, standing on the covered steps, her arms wrapped around herself. She looked up when he arrived, and something about the way she looked at him, like she was barely holding it together, made him stop short. "Claire," his voice was gentle, but she flinched like he had startled her. She didn't say anything right away. Just stared at him for a long moment before finally whispering, "I lost a patient tonight." Ryan swallowed hard. He had never been in her shoes, never known what it was like to carry that kind of weight. But he knew Claire. Knew that she would take this loss and hold it deep inside herself, let it press down on her until she couldn't breathe. So, he did the only thing he could. He stepped forward and pulled her into his arms. Claire tensed for half a second before she broke, her body folding against his, her fingers clutching at the soaked fabric of his shirt. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs, and Ryan held her tighter, grounding her, letting her feel everything she had been holding back. They stood there for what felt like forever, the storm raging around them, but Ryan didn't care. He would stand here all night if she needed him to. Finally, when her breathing had steadied and the storm had softened to a gentle drizzle, Claire pulled back just enough to look at him. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face damp not just from the rain but from everything she had been holding in. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered, her voice raw. "I don't know how to let someone be there for me." Ryan cupped her face, his thumb brushing lightly over her cheek. "You don't have to know how, Claire. You just have to let me." Her lips parted slightly, like she wanted to argue, like she wanted to tell him that she was fine, that she didn't need this. But then, after a long, shaky breath, she closed her eyes and nodded, and for Ryan, that was enough. For now, Claire had never known what it was like to let someone catch her when she was falling. But Ryan, he had been there, steady as the ground beneath her feet, unwavering in a way that terrified and comforted her all at once. After that night in the rain, something shifted between them. The walls she had built so carefully began to crumble, brick by brick, and Ryan didn't push, he simply stood there, waiting, ready for her whenever she was ready for him. And she was. She was ready to stop holding back. She was ready to love him the way he deserved. It started in small ways. She stopped hesitating before reaching for his hand. She let herself fall asleep on his couch after long shifts, trusting that he wouldn't let the world slip away while she rested. She let him see her, not just the version of herself she showed the world, the competent, unshakable nurse, but the woman underneath, the one with tired eyes and a heart big enough to carry the weight of others. Ryan never asked for more than what she was willing to give, but when she gave, he took it with the kind of reverence that made her chest ache. And then, one night, it wasn't just small things anymore. It was everything. They had spent the evening at his place, dinner forgotten on the coffee table as they curled up together on the couch, his arm draped over her shoulder, her fingers tracing patterns on his forearm. The television hummed in the background, but neither of them were really paying attention. Claire turned slightly, just enough to look at him. His eyes were already on her, warm and steady, like he had been waiting for this moment. She swallowed hard. "Ryan." "Yeah." His voice was quiet, but there was something deeper in it, something that sent warmth spreading through her chest. She exhaled, steadying herself. "I love you." It was the first time she had said it out loud, the first time she had let the words leave her lips without fear of what they might mean. For a second, Ryan didn't move, didn't even breathe. Then, slowly, a smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "I know," he murmured. Claire let out a soft, breathless laugh. "Oh, do you?" He nodded, his fingers brushing against her cheek. "Yeah. But it's still nice to hear." She rolled her eyes, but before she could respond, he leaned in, closing the space between them. The kiss was slow, unhurried, but it wasn't just a kiss, it was a promise, a quiet vow between them. Claire melted into it, into him, into everything that had been building between them since the moment he had given up his subway seat for her. When they finally pulled apart, Ryan pressed his forehead against hers, his breath warm against her skin. "I love you too," he whispered, and just like that, something inside her settled. There was no question anymore, no hesitation, no fear. Ryan was hers, and she was his. The rest of the world could wait.